Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we're going to be talking about the Gospel Coalition and their countdown of the top 10 top theology stories of 2021. And this list could not be so disparate from reality, from the pews, from the laity. It is just Big Eva mentality. And just the regular people are completely left out of consideration when it comes to this list. So this list is in an article titled My Top Theology Stories of 2021. It is written by Collin, Hansen, the editor of the Gospel Coalition. And I got beef with that guy. I got some beef with that guy. Him and Jonathan Leeman, I keep forgetting his name, did a joint grift together where they wrote a book about why it's essential to attend church and in-person worship after telling people for a year that it was not essential. I got some major beef about people trying to grift off of proper theology when it is not courageous to do so. They are fighting yesterday's battle hard today, and that is a major theme of this list. And we're going to go through that list, so let us dive right in. But first, don't forget to like the video and also subscribe to the Evangelical Dark Web, and also check out evangelicaldarkweb.org. And you can also become a subscriber there. We got articles almost every day, and good articles at that, if I do say so myself. So with that said, let's dive right on into my top theology stories of 2021. Collin Hansen, like I said, is the author, and this is pretty fresh. I'm going to skip this part, but it's worth noting he does cite a story in the Atlantic, so we're off to a pretty rough start. So number 10, welcome to the Metaverse. Welcome to the Metaverse. I did a video on this, and basically what I talked about is I don't think the Metaverse is really a real thing. I don't think it's going to catch on. I think too many people are going to say, this is dystopian. They're going to wake up to that fact, that the fact that NPCs or NFTs are cringe. And that's just what NPCs buy. NPCs buy NFTs. There we go. So the idea of, the dystopian Great Reset New World Order mantra is you will own nothing and you will be happy. That is basically what the Metaverse is. When you talk about, people buying virtual property that has no real value. Obviously that is they're owning nothing and they will be happy. That is what the Metaverse pretty much is. I did an entire video on that. I don't think the Metaverse will catch on. I think it's going to be one of those things, in my opinion. I think certain aspects of technological changes will catch on, but I do not think the concepts that they're floating, like NFTs, I think are a fad because they have no real value. At least with cryptocurrency, there's actual value in theory, of course. But in NFTs, there's no value in theory other than what someone's willing to pay for it, and you're banking on something that has no value appreciating in value. So, that's a pretty stupid bet, and it's non-fungible, unlike a cryptocurrency, which is in theory fungible. So with that said, we can move on to number 9. Rising generations debates loyalty in two pre-reformed creeds. This is a little off the wall, but I welcome this, especially within the Baptist tradition. Younger theologians continue to contend with each other over the relationship between the Bible and ecumenical creeds. What began several years ago with Presbyterian criticism of theologians who find eternal relations of submission and authority, eros, within the Trinity has now broadened to cover theological method itself. Pointed criticism between students and mentors suggests Baptist theologians will divide, as some align with Protestants and even Catholics and Orthodox counterparts on classical theism. This is just so not worthy of being in the top 10. This is not worthy of being in the top 10. This is such a tertiary issue, in my opinion. This is tertiary. This is Twitter talk. This is not a real this is not a top 10. This would not make my top 10. Neither would the Metaverse. That wouldn't make my top 10 either. Because I don't think that's going to be a real thing in the way that they're saying it's going to be. So this is just so navel gazing. How many angels are on a head of a dance on the head of a needle? And it's not like that issue is not important at all, but it's not important when we have so many more important issues going on right now. There are so many other more important and pressing theological issues going on right now. Anything to do with social justice is a more pressing threat to the gospel than this. So it just shouldn't even be on the radar. Verdicts revive trauma from violence in 2020. That is such a beta way to say that. One of the biggest stories this year, for sure, are the series of verdicts that we've gotten. This has been a major year. If you are someone who follows murder trials and viral trials, this is a major year for you. This is a major year for you. And let me just say, we've gotten like 3 just verdicts in a row. I think the Josh Duggar verdict was just. I know I did a video on that. The Jussie Smollett verdict was just, and the Kyle Rittenhouse acquittal was very just. So 3 guilty verdicts in the trial for the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. Evangelical Dark Web had an article on that. You should check that out. Didn't elicit nearly so much debate among Christians as the acquittal of Kyle Rittenhouse. And let me just pause right there. And that's sad because Ahmaud Arbery, or the guilty verdict in relation to Ahmaud Arbery was completely valid. That was a very valid guilty verdict. They clearly did not have a case for self-defense because they were trying to initial an unlawful citizen's arrest, which was properly interpreted as false imprisonment. So they violated the law. They committed a crime or a felony against Ahmaud Arbery and killed him in the process. So they got rightfully convicted of murder. And Kyle Rittenhouse, that should not be remotely debatable at all, but we have a bunch of stupid people in our society that thought he killed black people. That's a fact. And you can't negotiate with those people. You just got to plow right through them because those people are too stupid to debate. And some of them are in evangelical circles, like Karen Swallow Pryor, who went to Twitter recently. And I didn't do a video on this because, I don't know, it's on Twitter and it was passing, so I'm already late to the party. But she was basically clutching her pearls at interviews that Kyle Rittenhouse gave after, because he's doing like a media tour or whatever. And she's clutching her pearls at comments he made about what he likes, what he finds physically attractive in females. And I get it. But let's not pretend that like he's a special kind of deviant or something like that. Some Christians see Rittenhouse as a model for self-defense in a city that authorities allowed to devolve into anarchy. Others see him as a dangerous vigilante even after a not guilty verdict. Now, we could do an entire video on vigilantism and why it actually is biblical. But that's just another topic for another day because, again, I don't think vigilantism is not biblical. So, even if he was a dangerous vigilante, that doesn't mean he's in the wrong. Even after a not guilty verdict, theological priority on fighting persistent racism or resisting the spread of critical race theory tends to follow which case and which verdict you see as more representative of the American culture in 2021. That's a bit of a false dichotomy there. I actually see both. These verdicts could not be more disparate and for reasons, not because of the interest. I mean, again, the Kyle Rittenhouse trial got more attention from both sides, I would say. I've been loosely following a lot of these trials. And again, these could not be more dissimilar situations. Kyle Rittenhouse was not committing a felony and was chased down by a pedophile who was trying to reach for his gun. He was armed. Kyle Rittenhouse killed 2 armed people. The guy that was touching his gun and, he didn't kill 2 unarmed. he didn't kill two armed people. He shot two armed people. One of them died. The other was Gage Grosskreutz, who survived. The other guy with the skateboard, who might not have been armed with a gun, but was armed with a deadly weapon, was also armed. Yeah. So with that said, this is a crap take, but I don't discount it being on the top 10. I don't think this has no place being on the top 10. Personally, would have thought he would have gone into the Derek Chauvin verdict a little harder. I mean, if you're gonna Big Eva virtue signal, you at least got to do it right, I suppose. Number 7, cultural and historical shape of evangelical scrutinized. This just sounds like we care the world is watching, but let's read what he actually says. Unlike the Roman pontiff, no bishop of Wheaton has the authority to define evangelicalism, which spans the globe. But that doesn't stop authors from tugging between theological and cultural descriptions of this amorphous Protestant renewal movement. The political ascendancy of white evangelicals as an American voting bloc, especially since 2016, has spawned best-selling critiques that fault Protestant theology for cultural captivity. A spiritually healthy version of deconstruction would be de-unculturalization. That's a new enculturation. That's a new word for me. As every generation must distinguish between the timeless gospel and their myopic age. This does kind of sound like pablum, and rightfully so. Again, I don't see this as a story. This is like a broader issue. It's not actually a story. So to me, a little bit of false advertising if you're going to put that in the title. Because this is a lot of fluff, but not a lot of substance. But I suppose he's linking to a bunch of things that I don't feel like reading. So let's skip to number 6. Biden's White House advances liberal, which is a false label. It should be communist or leftist agenda as Trump's Supreme Court prepares key decisions. Now, I think, just as a pause right here, I think we should be using communist more in our political lexicon because that's basically what we're up against. But liberal is just unacceptable to me at this point. Maybe the biggest reason U.S. presidential candidates have taken an apocalyptic flavor is expanding the role of the unelected Supreme Court in mediating cultural impasses. And nothing stokes the passion of American democracy quite like abortion. Leftist justices identify the pro-life argument as a religious view, but fail to recognize that all human rights derive from theological conclusions. When President Biden's White House demands federal funding for abortion as a public good, or child sacrifice, state-sponsored, or a new Trump-appointed Catholic justices allow state-level restrictions, they can't help but draw conclusions about the author of life. I would agree that this deserves to be on the list. I think it is poorly worded because, again, you could make a much better, more concise number 6 by saying that we have the chance to overturn Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey in the United States. That's huge. In effect, it is not in effect in Texas at the moment, I don't think. And Mississippi could be the undoing of the entire nation. Now, hopefully, like I said in the past, hopefully John Roberts does not get on board. Hopefully he sides with the communist justices and we get a 5-4 decision, in which case Thomas writes a decision. And not to just pop anyone's balloon or anything, but I'm a little worried about Trump justices Neil Gorsuch, who's an Episcopalian, and Amy Coney Barrett, who's a COVID Karen, being on the Supreme Court for this decision. Now, everyone was so assured that she would be a solid vote on this issue in particular. Neil Gorsuch, not so much. He has no record on the issue. And Brett Kavanaugh, oddly enough, seems to be the most solid of the three in this particular case, in the Dobbs case. So it'll be interesting. This deserves to be on the list. Should be worded a lot more concise so that we understand the real issues. But I understand you're trying to make this a theological point, and this is, I don't know, more of a political story than a poorly worded political story than a theological story. So, Southern Baptists, this is number 5. Southern Baptist dividing lines harden in closely contested presidential election. It's worth noting when smaller denominations such as Presbyterian Church in America debate modern concepts of identity and release timely reports on human sexuality. Hold on. Let me date check that article for a second. Timely report. September 13th is not a timely report. Modern concepts of identity, but nothing shapes evangelical priorities like the massive Southern Baptist Convention, where the generation's most influential theological educator finished third in their watershed presidential election. Fights over the SBC polity and abuse that dogged Mike Stone's second place campaign quickly shifted to accusations of plagiarism against the winner, Ed Litton. Yet unresolved is the question outgoing President J.D. Greer left the executive committee. Will the Southern or the Baptist identity prevail in the SBC? Now that is just, again, really an abuse that dogged Mike Stone. Like, Mike Stone, there's no evidence that he abused anyone. There just isn't. And there's no evidence that any sort of investigation should really be taking place in the Southern Baptist Convention. And yet they suspended their executive privilege, or their attorney-client privilege over this issue, which they didn't have evidence to really open up an investigation. They just had hearsay, basically. So this should actually be higher on the list. I would have the Southern Baptist Convention and the liberal drift just cementing their seal of the Southern Baptist Convention. I would have that much higher than 5 on the list. This is a little low in my opinion. But again, I think I'm going to do my own stream. Actually, I'm planning on doing my own stream, just a year-end review stream. I'm thinking December 29th in the evening. So you should keep your calendars marked for that. And we'll do that. Number 4, Afghanistan withdrawal threatens persecuted Christians. The American population could no longer see a path to stability and victory in the 2-decade war in Afghanistan, but they also recoiled at the images of desperate allies seeking to escape the vengeance of America's enemies. Christians worked behind the scenes to evacuate friends ahead of the anticipated Taliban crackdown on the underground church, but others, even Americans, stayed because they know the sovereign God can't be thwarted by the Taliban, at least in eternity. Now, again, kind of think this one's a little high on the list. Because there isn't that much of a church in Afghanistan, and who knows how well they will or will not do under persecution. But yeah, it top 10, I'm not faulting it for being the top 10. I don't think it's top 5 though. But that's just an American perspective. But again, there's persecuted Christians everywhere. That is, I wouldn't even say that's the most dynamic change, because their culture isn't changing all that much. The Taliban will seek their revenge on their political enemies, but otherwise, the population there is like 97% Muslim. They all support Sharia law. They're not into the American feminist agenda that we kind of imposed on Afghanistan. They don't care about girls not going to school. They don't care about that stuff in Afghanistan. We just take pictures of that for American media to tout the suffering and all that, but that is definitely the biggest example of suffering that will take place in Afghanistan. I just don't think it's a top 5 story. Vaccines add to church divisions over COVID-19 measures. This is a top 3 for sure. Should it be higher? That's certainly, we'll debate that when we look at the 2 that are ahead of it. Vaccines add to church divisions. I've done a lot of reporting on this. I definitely amped up my fight against branch Covidianism in 2021. I really should have done that earlier in 2020, but I was not doing daily videos or multi-weekly videos all that much in 2020. It wasn't until I really moved here that was the case. So with that said, anywhere of Facebook mom groups in recent years could have anticipated the lackluster response among some Christians to the COVID-19 vaccines that became universally available by the first half of 2021. Vaccine skepticism remains high today across Africa as well. Interesting, because that is like the least vaccinated continent, and guess what? They're doing pretty good over there as far as COVID's concerned. They're doing pretty good in Africa. I wonder why, because they didn't push these things. Remember, when it comes to coronavirus, there's 2 things that do not work. One goes on your face, the other goes in your arm. Southern Baptist Theological Seminary and Asbury Theological Seminary sued over President Biden's vaccine mandate for any business with more than 100 employees. Again, I gotta trash those 2 seminaries for doing that, especially Al Mohler, because this is not courageous whatsoever. I award Al Mohler 0 points for doing this because he has been an absolute pansy and a useful idiot on this issue this entire time, and now that it's a popular fight to take, he wants to fight the fight. Get to the back of the line. I have no patience for these types of people. I just don't. Get to the back of the line. I can't stand these people. Let's see. Famously agreeable Canadians even fought over the case of Pastor James Coate in Alberta after he refused to limit capacity at his Edmonton church. Churches of all denominations and all locations report tension between conspiracy and authority in a pandemic that may have abated but has not ended. I think this should actually be higher on the list, because we got to talk about the unbiblical requirements that churches impose by mandating masking or mandating vaccines. Again, there is no moral difference between the 2. Those are morally equivocal actions. Those are logically the same actions. If you mandated masks, there's no reason for you not to mandate the vaccines also, because you have a cult mentality in your church. And, for you to say, oh, the vaccine's a bridge too far. No, you should own it. You should own it. Or repent completely. If you want to repent completely, that's one thing. You want to say, hey, I was wrong for imposing a mask mandate. The issue of imposing a vaccine mandate made me see how wrong I was on all the other things that I did. But that's not what churches are doing. Churches want to live the unaware, and they don't realize that they were the villains, and now that they're trying to champion the same thing that the heroes were saying on day 1. And Collin Hansen is an excellent example of doing this. Him and Jonathan Leeman promoted locking down your church. They promoted disobeying scripture all throughout 2020. And now, when it's a popular fight, they want to write a book and sell you that book about why corporate worship is essential. That sickens me. These people are grifters. They are clearly motivated by financial gain, and they're just evil. These people are evil. Number 2, the rise and fall of Mars Hill podcast rocks the church as leaders continue to fall. No, it did not rock the church. Why? Because it came out by Christianity Today. Christianity Today is not a Christian publication. They are a pagan publication. They are perhaps the worst. It's debatable. Maybe Religion News Service is worse. But they're certainly close. Now, here's the problem with the rise and fall of Mars Hill. From what I gather, they play some of the best preaching Mark Driscoll ever did and use that to say that this was emblematic of his problematic nature. And it's gross. And here's the thing. I'm not trying to defend Mark Driscoll here. And what I'm about to say is only hypothetical. But if a biblical church was on a spectrum between completely anti-biblical versus biblical, if that were a spectrum, it's not. I think it's a standard, not a spectrum. But if it were a spectrum, Mark Driscoll and Trinity Church, the Trinity Church, I believe is his new location in Arizona, would be more biblical than these Big Eva clowns' churches. Collin, Hansen, I'm looking at you because you locked down your church over coronavirus. Christianity Today, the people making that podcast, Mark Driscoll's church is more biblical than theirs. That is, I would bet on that. I would bet hard on that. Because, again, you don't, Christians don't write for Christianity Today. It's just unheard of these days. But, so Mark Driscoll might track you down with private investigators, but at least he doesn't lock down his church or mandate masking. So, the shame on these people. They should take the speck out of the log out of their own eye before they worry about the speck of Mark Driscoll's eye. That being said, this podcast did not have the cultural impact that they say it did. This should not be in the top 10, let alone the top 5, let alone the top 2. The Ravi Zacharias abuse, that actually should be in the top 10. That should be a separate thing, the fall of Ravi Zacharias and how he was largely exposed to be the fraud that he really was. I think he was a completely false teacher the entire time. And him playing, him going for happy ending massages at Asian massage parlors is not exactly, maybe they weren't Asian, but it is not exactly the first red flag from Ravi Zacharias. This guy had an adultery affair. This guy promoted Sam Albury. This guy had numerous red flags. I did 2 videos on Ravi Zacharias, one pre and post the report that came out. That guy was a false teacher, and I think God wielded that event, and maybe that should go in my top 10. We'll definitely see, and I'll talk more about that then. I think God played a hand in that story coming out. I really do. Prominent churches suffered internal divisions in this atmosphere of mutual suspicion. Because many Christians today expect their leaders to affirm more than challenge them, theologians will continue to debate the proper definition and application of empathy. Now, maybe that's referring to the podcast, but that was kind of a non sequitur in my opinion. So let's move on to number 1, the number 1 issue, because after all, we are going a little long in this video. U.S. Capitol storming unleashes flurry of debate over Christian nationalism. Now, if you're not a Christian nationalist, what are you doing as a Christian? Because, again, our kingdom is not of this world. This world's not supposed to be our final home. We should be nationalists for Jesus' kingdom. But I guess on a political sense, you are either a nationalist or a globalist, or you could be a localist or a nativist. You could be one of those things. Nationalist actually is the most moderate of the 4 things that I just listed. So, because being a globalist is just flat out evil. So let's just be blunt about that. You basically support Great Reset, New World Order, all that other stuff. 9 months of tension and over the pandemic and politics exploded on January 6th in a surreal scene of hangman's nooses interspersed among crosses at the U.S. Capitol lawn. Subsequent think pieces on Christian nationalism sometimes conflated appropriate patriotism with unbiblical syncretism. However, it is still worth asking why so many Christians responded to the 2020 election result with violent anger, even now refuse to accept the results. Maybe it's not Christian nationalism where promises of God's people are applied to the United States. That's not what Christian nationalism is. I just defined it where promises in Christian nationalism in the American context is that America is a Christian nation. That's what it would mean in this context. Not that America is the new Israel. That is a nonsensical farce. Because I don't even think the state of Israel as it exists right now is the real Israel. But we can talk about covenant theology later. Where promises to God's people are applied to the United States, but it still might be an over-realized eschatology or a mistaken view of the covenants. So again, this should not be in the top 5. Now, maybe a debate over Christian nationalism. If you're Big Eva, I guess that's in the top 5. But again, this was a fake insurrection. This was a complete farce. And Trump did these people dirty. He should have issued a blanket pardon on that event. Instead, the Democrats that were in that event get to go free because they were FBI agents or informants or whatever. They get to go free while Trump let his base get screwed there. And then Ashley Babbitt's murderer goes unpunished. So this is just an absurd take. I promoted this on YouTube already, but an article over at Evangelical Dark Web titled The American Gulag, which talked about the conditions of the J6 political prisoners, because they are political prisoners. And I do not apologize or condemn them, because storming a Capitol is in the realm of what happens in American politics. That's what happens in American politics. They didn't break in. They were ushered in by police officers and set up. So this was nonsense what happened to these people, and it's unacceptable, and Trump screwed these people over. He really did. So with that said, top 10. We have rounded out our top 10. It took us a half hour to do so, but there's a lot of substance going on in this article, sort of. Final thoughts. This is a very Big Eva mentality. We definitely see the Big Eva mentality going on within the Gospel Coalition. Very few of these. I can't remember my count of how many of these should have made the top 10 as they were written. Certainly the Ravi Zacharias, certainly the Southern Baptist Convention, and just a few others. But very weak sauce list, very out of touch. What about the PCA? Where were they on the list? They should have been on the list. Docent Research Group, where is that on the list? Oh, wait. One of their writers over at the Gospel Coalition is pretty in tight cahoots with the Docent Research Group. A lot of stuff should have been on the list that was not on the list. If anything rocked the church, Enemies Within the Church rocked the church, not Mars Hill's podcast. I don't care about that. Enemies Within the Church, and it's not like they broke anything new, but they certainly upset people like Adam Greenway with melting down over it. So those are some final thoughts. Again, if you like this kind of content, and if you want to support this kind of content, at a minimum, subscribe to the Evangelical Dark Web. And if you want, at a maximum, become a paid subscriber over at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. Got a Patreon-like system there. And I'm running a promo on DVDs for Enemies Within the Church. If you are a Zealot or Peacemaker class subscriber, I will give that to you for free. Stick around and let me know what you think about what I think in the comment section below. And I will catch you on the next one.